relaxing lunch. My name is Elizabeth Barnes. Thank you for coming today. I am a PhD student at Arizona State University in the Biology Education Research Lab. And today I want to talk to you guys about a module that may be able to reduce your students' perceived conflict between religion and evolution. So, as I doubt many of you need convincing, evolution is pretty important to biology, right? It's been cited as the foundation of biology. It unites all of biology's subdisciplines. And biologists and national documents agree that evolution is a core concept of biology that should be taught at every level of undergraduate biology education. However, it remains controversial even among our students in our classes. So I'm sure many of you know that the Gallup national polls show that 50% of people in the United States reject evolution. But what's more surprising is that past research has shown that up to 50% of students in our introductory biology majors courses reject evolution. And then when we get to the upper level courses, we've seen studies that show that up to 30% of our students in an upper level evolution majors course can reject evolution biology majors course. So, given biology or evolution's foundational position in biology, why does it remain so controversial even among our students in our biology classes? Well, unlike other topics in biology, students can see a perceived conflict with their religious beliefs in evolution. And when we teach other things in biology, like photosynthesis, for instance, we teach students the processes of photosynthesis, the evidence behind how we discovered the processes underlying photosynthesis, and acceptance of that concept generally just naturally follows from our students. But with evolution, that's not the case because of this perceived conflict with religious beliefs. A student can have a very high understanding of evolution, yet still choose to reject it. So therefore, if we teach evolution in the same way that we teach other things like photosynthesis by giving them the facts about evolution, the evidence for evolution, although that's very important, it may not be enough to change that student's mind if they reject evolution because of their belief in God. So, and it's no surprise that students see a conflict between their religious beliefs and evolution because we see this in popular culture and the media all the time. And in fact, we even have prominent biologists that have written entire books about how evolution and religion have to be in conflict. But what students are less likely to see is that there are many examples of prominent biologists who say that evolution and religion do not have to be in conflict, like Francis Collins, who is the director of the NIH, or even one of the pioneers of the evolutionary modern synthesis, Theodosius Dobzhansky, also has said that evolution does not have to be in conflict with religious faith. So that got me and my group wondering, if all of these viewpoints exist even within and among scientists, then can we actually reduce students' perceived conflict between religion and evolution by making them aware of this diversity of viewpoint and having discussions about the relationship between religion and evolution? And so how we did that is we taught a 2-week module in an introductory college biology class on evolution, and we covered all of the normal things that you usually cover when you teach evolution, such as natural selection, speciation, and evidence for evolution. However, additionally, on 2 days in class, we added in discussions about the relationship between religion and evolution, and they even did some readings at home about this subject. And there were 3 components to these discussions. One of the components was a discussion of the spectrum of viewpoints on the relationship between religion and evolution. So we talked about special creationism, a viewpoint of evolution with some sort of God's influence, and evolution without any God's influence. And then we compared and contrasted these ideas on their alignment with a more or less literal interpretation of religious text. And we also compared and contrasted these viewpoints with whether or not they were more or less scientifically defensible given what we know from biology. We also invited a religious biologist guest speaker to our course. This individual video conferenced in with our class, and he discussed his advocacy for evolution. But he also discussed his own personal journey of reconciling his religious faith with evolution. And then students were given an opportunity to have an open discussion with our religious scientist visitor to ask any questions they had about evolution and religion. And then finally, we had a discussion with students about the bounded nature of science. And we used Stephen Jay Gould's non-overlapping magisteria framework to talk about this, about how science lies within the domain of answering natural questions about the natural world, so the hows, whys, whats, whens of the natural world, whereas philosophy and religion can potentially answer questions about the purpose of life, the existence of God, and how we ought to live. And although these two things may potentially inform one another to some extent, if they stay within their respective domains, they don't necessarily have to conflict with one another. All right, so we have these discussions, but how did we measure whether we change students' perceived conflict? Well, we had a survey before and after the evolution module in which we recorded the students' religiosity, so the commitment to religion in their life and how important they see religion in their life. And we also asked them an open-ended question, so briefly describe your views on the relationship between religion and evolution in a few sentences. And we had about 60 students that finished this before the module and after the module. All right, and then we took students' responses and we categorized them into one of three categories. So the response either indicated that the student thought religion and evolution was in conflict, or they thought evolution and religion was compatible, and these are examples of student responses that were categorized in those areas. And then we also had a category of unclear, so the student didn't provide enough information to tell us whether or not they thought evolution and religion were compatible or in conflict. And then we looked at each individual student to see what their response fell into before and after the module. And this is what we found. So first we had students who didn't change. So we had about a quarter of the class that came into the classroom thinking evolution and religion were in conflict and ended the same way. And we also had a handful of students who started and ended with a compatible perception. But we did not have one student who moved towards a conflict. So no student came into the class believing that the two were compatible or even had an unclear answer and moved towards conflict. And then interestingly, we had about a third of our students who started the evolution module thinking that evolution and religion were in conflict and ended thinking that they were compatible potentially. And this is what this looks like in just the raw numbers. So on this side, we have the number of student responses that fell into each category before the module and after the module. And what you can see is that we saw about a 50% reduction in the number of students who thought that evolution and religion were in conflict, and about a 50% increase in the number of students who thought that they were compatible. And then, so we thought that we would see this among religious students, right? But what was surprising is that we also saw about a third of our non-religious students who started thinking evolution and religion were in conflict and ended thinking they were compatible, which was really interesting to us. And these are just examples of some of those students and what their responses looked like. So for instance, this religious student said, religion says that all started from Adam and Eve, but evolutionary theory disproves this. If evolutionary theory is falsified, there could be some validity to Adam and Eve. And then after instruction, the student said, evolution coincides with religion, and there is no reason why it can't. And then this is one of my favorite responses from the whole study, from a non-religious student, who before instruction said, evolution and religion is a can of worms, and it's a fight that will keep being waged until the end of time. So pretty intense. And then after instruction, they said they can agree. Very contrasting. All right, and then, so among our religious students, it seemed that the implications for reducing perceived conflict for them was that they could keep their religious beliefs and still accept evolution. So this religious student, for instance, said that the religious scientist visitor helped me to see that it is possible to have religion and science both within your life. It helped me to realize that I do not necessarily have to pick one over the other. And this is something that we saw over and over again among our student responses among the religious students, is they said, look, I really just didn't know that I could have both. And the reality is that a lot of students have religious beliefs that are very salient to their lives. It's very important. And if they think that they have to choose one or the other, we can all guess which way they're going to go. But then we had the non-religious students, and we wanted to know, well, how did this reduction in perceived conflict actually change their points of view? And interestingly, we saw that among non-religious students, they tended to change their perception of the way they saw religious people in biology. So for instance, we had these students, this one student said, I appreciated that scientists are able to be considered religious without it compromising their research. And then this other student, non-religious student said, appreciate that there are people who believe in evolution, who are religiously affiliated, because it showed me that they did not let their religion interfere with fact. Alright, so what we took from this is first, it is possible for college instructors to reduce perceived conflict between evolution and religion among their students and their classes. And also, among religious students, this is going to have implications for the way they feel about and accept evolution. And then, surprisingly, reducing perceived conflict among non-religious students might have implications for the way that they view religious individuals and their credibility in science. I want to take a second to acknowledge my collaborator. So Sarah Brunell is the PI of the Biology Education Research Lab at Arizona State University, and Jim Elser was the instructor of the course that we studied. And here are my references, and thank you all very much. I will now take any questions. Yes?
So religious is not one thing, right?
Correct.
So it's very different if your religion is a biblical literalism versus non-biblical literalism. Did you do any sort of subdivision within the religious students to see if there was a difference based on what religious tradition they were coming from?
So we didn't ask them about their religious tradition, and that's a really good question because there are differences in religious traditions and their acceptance or rejection of evolution. So for instance, Catholics tend to have a higher acceptance of evolution than, say, evangelical Christians, right? But even among Catholics, we have 60% who reject evolution. So instead of asking students about their religious denomination, we just ask them about whether or not they perceived a conflict, right? So if they're a biblical literalist, they probably do perceive a conflict, and I would hope that we would see that in their responses. Anybody else? Yes?
In my personal conversations with these more religious people, I've always noticed they had more of a problem with speciation than things like natural selection. Have you noticed the same thing?
Absolutely. So I think that it's safe to say that almost everybody you meet will not have a problem with natural selection. So antibiotic resistance, right? Everybody accepts that. But it's when you start talking about species changing into other species, or particularly humans speciating from other animals, that it becomes a particular contention. And then I saw a question over there.
Yeah, I'm wondering, so I feel really comfortable talking about evolution in my classroom, but I don't feel comfortable talking about different religious beliefs because I personally am not religious. I have very little experience.
Yeah.
So how did that play out in this classroom when you were reading or the students were reading primary literature? Were you the teacher in the class, or?
I was a teaching assistant. So I was in class every day and I was helping with the active learning material.
So how is that, to actually implement this module, is that something that the instructors need to brush up on pretty well? Is it different perspectives?
So that's a great question. So we actually did another study where we interviewed instructors who are teaching evolution about how they might discuss religion, and this was one thing that came up several times, was that a lot of instructors are not religious themselves, and they don't know a lot about this. And so it's hard for them to feel comfortable coming up and talking about something so controversial. Almost the same way that high school instructors are uncomfortable talking about evolution, right? College instructors are uncomfortable talking about religion, and that's understandable. Unfortunately, the research is showing that if we just keep pounding the facts about evolution into students' heads, that it's not going to change their mind. So perhaps we do need to start brushing up.